They said the great fire began with sparks and wind, but some whispered it started with a voice too young to carry such ruin. A girl's whisper carried on black wings. The night was restless. Long before the first flame was seen, the air held a fevered, a weight that pressed upon the chest like a hand. Even the river seemed uneasy, its waters shifting against the banks as though listening for something it could not name. In the alleys, stray dogs whined at shadows that had no shape, and in the rafters of homes too tightly built, the crows had already gathered, their eyes shining like charred lanterns. It was in the smallest house on the edge of Decoven Street that the first true tremor passed. A whisper soft enough to seem no more than a sigh left. The lips of a girl no older than 12. Her hair was the color of unlit coal, her skin pale as candle wax. She stood in her bedchamber, unblinking, while the walls around her seemed to bend inward as if listening. Those who survived long enough to remember swore the fire did not come first. The fire was only the body of the curse. The voice was its soul. Neighbors later claimed they heard the sound long before they smelled smoke. A low hum rising through the rafters of their homes, as though their attics had begun to breathe. Some thought it wind, though the night was still. Others thought it pipes, though no water moved. But the hum threaded its way through brick and timber until it sat in the skull of every man and woman like a second heartbeat. When they pressed their palms to their ears, the sound only grew louder, a whisper made of ashes already burning in places no eye could see. The first crow lifted from the girl's windowsill, its wings unfolding with a sound like parchment, torn from an old book. It did not fly upward into the night, but downward into the street, its feathers trailing sparks, though no torch had touched them. More followed the rooftops, swelling black with their weight. Every wing beat carried the girl's. Whisper further, until it hung over the city like a veil. She did not scream, she did not chant. She only breathed words too quiet for any living tongue to capture. But the crows heard, and they obeyed. On the far side of the city, lanterns flickered without. Wine fires lit in places no match had been struck. Some swore they saw the flames rise not from wood or hay, but from the very air, as though the night itself had been soaked in oil. Children cried at the sound of the bells ringing, though no hands touched them, yet not a soul left their homes. All felt pressed against the earth by the weight of something watching. In one tavern, a drunkard staggered into the street and swore aloud that the girl's shadow stretched across the cobblestones, though no lamp was behind her. He said it moved with the shape of wings, its edges curling and snapping like feathers. When he reached to touch it, his hand blistered with heat, though the stones beneath were still cold. He did not cry out. The whisper in his skull drowned every voice but hers. The fire, they would later write, began in the barn of O'Leary's cowshed, that it was accident, not omen. But those who saw the black wings first knew better. They saw the girl standing barefoot in her yard, her gaze fixed not on the barn but on the sky, as if she were waiting for the heavens to split open. The flames rose behind her, yet her shadow stretched forward, and every crow in the city circled above, as though guarding her. By midnight the sky was a single furnace. Timbers screamed as they split. Men shouted names already fading from their own throats, but beneath all the noise one sound endured, a child's whisper flowing through the crackle of fire, through the thunder of collapsing. Walls. Some claimed it said hush, others swore it said more, but all agreed that it was not the voice of any mortal child. Ash fell like snow, burying the city in grey silence. Those who tried to flee found the streets twisted and unending, as though the city itself had turned in upon itself. Some swore they walked in circles, seeing the same house burn again and again, even after it had collapsed to ash, and through every window the same pale face looked back at them, the same lifted hand summoning wings. When the wind finally broke, it carried embers across the river, and the city behind was left half ash, half shadow. In the rubble they found prints too small to belong to any man, yet too heavy to belong to a child. Each print led not into the alleys or the squares, but into the burned-out church at the heart of the district. The bell tower stood, though blackened, the bells still swaying as though moved by invisible hands, and within the doorway stood the girl, her eyes reflecting flame. Though none remained, her lips still moving, her whisper feeding the wings that perched all around the steeple. The fire was never the ending, it was only the beginning, for as the city smouldered, the crows did not leave. They lingered in rows upon the broken beams, their eyes never closing, their feathers never burning. And those who tried to sleep among the ruins heard her whisper, even in their dreams, a voice too soft to resist, too heavy to silence. And when one man dared to speak against her, when he dared to cry out that she was no child but a curse, the crows descended. When they rose again, nothing was left of him but a jawbone clenched as though still shouting. The ashes spoke that night, and their voice belonged to her. The first crow did not caw, it croaked like a grave unsealed. The sound was not of life, but of something long buried, breaking through the soil. Then came another and another, until the air grew thick with wings and blackened feathers. What began as a single echo spread into a storm of throats shrieking, as though the city itself were being devoured from above. The survivors who huddled in the alleys swore the crows did not come for grain or meat. They came for faces. They circled low heads, twisting, as if memorizing the shape of every eye, every mouth, every scar. One woman wept into her palms, and when she lifted her head, the crows had already gathered around her, their necks bent at the same angle, their eyes reflecting her own. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, whispering prayers that fell like cracked glass from trembling lips. But the prayers dissolved before they reached heaven, for the crows drowned every word with their croaks. The sound was not wild, not chaotic. It was deliberate, like a chant, like a single voice broken into 1,000 beaks, and all of it answered to the whisper of the girl. She stood at the mouth of the ruined street, her hand lifted as though she were conducting the storm. The fire behind her threw no shadow, yet her form swayed as if caught in a rhythm that only the birds could hear. The crows circled in widening rings, blotting out the last light of autumn, until the city lay beneath a ceiling of feathers. Ash fell upward, as well as downward the air. Refusing to decide which way death should flow, one man, a butcher by trade, thought himself braver than the rest. He seized a cleaver from the wreckage of his shop, and with a curse he hurled it at the birds. The blade never struck. It turned in the rye air as though caught by unseen hands and fell at the feet of the girl. She bent to touch it, her fingers grazing the steel, and when she rose, the crows screamed in unison, a sound that split the night like the tearing of cloth. The butcher fell too, his knees clutching his face. When he pulled his hands away, his features were gone, not torn, not bloodied, but erased as if scraped clean by invisible knives. Where his eyes had been, there were only smooth hollows. Where his mouth had been, only silence. He toppled without a cry, for he had no mouth left to make one. The others fled, but the crows followed their wings, whispering against stone walls, their eyes fixed on the terror carved into human faces. They did not peck or bite, they only hovered, staring until the flesh seemed to sag beneath their gaze. Names slipped from memory, first a neighbor's, then a brother's, then one's own. A woman tried to call her husband, but the sound caught in her throat because she could no longer recall what to call him. She fell against the cobbles, whispering nonsense syllables that meant nothing and everything, while the crows swayed above her, their eyes glittering with stolen memory. It became clear to all who dared look up that the flock did not hunger for flesh, they hungered for recognition. Each face was a lantern, and they were the smoke that suffocated it. Each name was a flame, and they were the ash that drowned it. The girl's whisper carried through the chorus of wings shaping their hunger like a shepherd guides a starving flock. Her words were never loud, never sharp. They were soft, curling around ears and bones like threads of smoke. One man swore she whispered his childhood name, a name only his mother had spoken. He felt it burning inside him like fire on parchment, and when he turned toward her, he knew with perfect certainty that she had always been waiting for him since the day he was born. He smiled. Then the crows descended. When they rose, only feathers remained, and not a soul alive could recall what his name had been. The fire raged, unchecked buildings falling inward like bodies folding for burial. Yet the greater fear was not the flames, but the silence that followed each cry. Voices vanished mid-eye. Scream throats moved, but no sound emerged. It was as if the crows plucked not words, but the right to make them. And through it all, the girl's eyes glowed with reflected fire and wing, her pale face unreadable, her lips moving in the same unbroken whisper. Some say the city could have been saved if the flock had not come, that water and hands could have beaten back flame, but nothing could turn away the birds. Their wings beat against the hearts of men. Their hunger hollowed the soul, even as the fire devoured walls, the flock devoured memory, until the people were only shells. Breathing, moving shells with no names, no faces, no past. By dawn, those who stumbled from the ruins did not know who they were. They carried no memory of father or child, no knowledge of where they had been or where they were going. Their eyes were blank as smoke, their tongues lay dead in their mouths. And overhead, the crows still circled, waiting for the whisper to call them again. The girl at the center of the ruins lowered her hand and the birds folded into silence. The fire crackled around her, yet did not touch her dress, her hair. She breathed once, then turned her gaze toward the church steeple, where bells waited to toll without hands, and as her whisper faded, the crows tilted their heads in unison as though listening for the next command. In the ruined street where the smoke still bled through the air, a child stood as if carved from stone. Her figure so still it seemed carved, not born, her pale hand raised toward the darkening sky. Behind her, the cracked glass of a shattered window trembled as though wings pressed against it from within. The night had grown restless with a silence more suffocating than fire. Streets twisted into unfamiliar shapes, alleys led nowhere, the cobblestones themselves cracked with the weight of unseen footsteps. Yet there she was, unmoved, untouched, her soot-stained dress swaying though no wind stirred, and those who saw her swore she was both inside the house and outside it, standing before the window yet framed within it, a double image too precise to dismiss, too impossible to endure. The survivors gathered at corners, whispering prayers through lips gone dry. None dared approach her yet, none could turn their eyes away. One man claimed he saw her mouth open as if calling, though no sound escaped. Instead, the glass behind her shuddered, as though bearing the weight of something pressing against it, something desperate to enter or escape. Her pale hand lifted higher, fingers crooked in a shape too deliberate to be a child's gesture, and from the rooftops the crows shivered. Their wings spread, their eyes gleamed with the reflection of a fire that had nearly burned itself out. But they did not take flight. They waited for the signal. She seemed to shape in the still air. A mother with a babe in arms dared to speak to her, voice trembling. "Child, come away, the fire has taken enough, come away and be safe." But the girl did not turn her head. She did not blink. She did not breathe like one who hears. Only the glass behind her trembled. Harder. The crows ruffled their feathers. The babe began to scream, though no sound left its throat. The mother clutched her child closer, but already its lips moved without voice. She staggered back in terror, knowing the birds had fed again, though. None had moved. Her own memory of the child's name slipped like smoke from her mind. She could no longer recall what she called the little one, only that she had once called at all. The girl's eyes finally moved. They fixed upon the mother, and the silence deepened, a silence so heavy it pressed the marrow in bone. And in that silence a whisper coiled not from her lips, but from the air itself. "Look closer." The mother fell to her knees, clutching her faceless babe, her voice gone, her mind. Hollow others swore they saw shadows move within the house behind the child, shapes flickering against the broken glass shapes, with wings too large to belong inside a human dwelling. The glass did not break, though the shadows pushed harder. Some swore they heard beaks scraping against it, the scratching of talons eager to pierce through. Yet the child held her hand aloft, commanding patience. It was as though she were holding the entire flock at bay, with a gesture so slight it might have been mistaken for the reaching of a lonely child toward the moon. The fire behind the city groaned and fell in sparks, but here no flame reached her. The air grew colder, not warmer, as though she had pulled the heat into herself, and her eyes glowed, faint not with flame, but with the pale reflection of wings that had not yet emerged. One boy no older than 14 dared to step closer. He had lost his family to the fire, his voice to the flock, his mind already slipping into silence. Yet some stubborn ember of courage forced him toward her. He stretched a trembling hand toward hers, his lips forming a word no longer known to him. Their fingers nearly touched, and then the glass shattered. The sound was not of breaking, but of wings tearing through. Bone! The house erupted with a gale of black feathers that split the night wide open. Crows poured from the window, a river of wings pouring around her, yet never touching her. They circled the boy, their eyes reflecting his face 100-fold until even he forgot it. When the birds rose, only dust clung to the place where he had stood. The girl lowered her hand and the last shards of glass clung to the frame, dripping as though wet with blood, though no wound had been made. She turned her head, slowly her gaze sweeping the survivors who trembled in the shadows of the alley. And with the faintest curve of her lips, she smiled. One voice whispered among the crowd, "She is not child, she is window." A window opened not into a house, but into the hunger that waits beyond. The word spread in hushed panic. The child at the window is not calling them, she is keeping them. She is holding the wings at bay only long enough to choose, and every choice is death. The crows returned to the rooftops there, wings folding their eyes unblinking. The glassless window stood behind her, its frame a mouth forever open, and she remained still, her hand lowering at last, her lips moving in a whisper, too faint for the living, but loud enough for the dead. Those who survived that night swore the sound never left them. Whenever they looked upon a window, they feared to see her hand upon the other side, and when the wind rattled the panes, they swore it was wings, brushing against the glass again, waiting for her to open the way. It was not fire that consumed the village, but the black rain of wings. The flames were a mask, a distraction for eyes too mortal to see what truly fed. The crows did not tear flesh. They tore memory. They did not eat the body. They ate the self, the night stretched thin as paper, the sky heavy with feathers that shut out the moon. Every rooftop bent under the weight of wings, every alley whispered with talons, scratching stone. The air itself seemed bruised, a dim bruise, where no light could enter. No sound could escape except the rustle of feathers and the endless toll of bells, and through it all the girl stood still. Her eyes closed, her lips moving in whispers too soft for words, too sharp for silence. The flock obeyed her hunger. They descended, not with fury but with patience, like doctors dissecting, like priests collecting tithes. One by one they landed upon the shoulders of the living, staring into eyes as mirrors stare. One man raised a lantern, thinking to frighten them, but when the bird turned its head, his own reflection burned in its eye. A moment later he no longer knew why he held the lantern or what a lantern was. The flame guttered out, and he dropped it, his hands empty as his memory. A woman clutched her child, whispering, a lullaby that faltered into broken notes. The crows gathered around her listening, swaying their heads in rhythm. When she forgot the next line, her mouth kept moving though no words came. Her child looked up at her face, unknowing who she was. The lullaby fell to silence, and the birds moved on their bellies full of stolen memory. Everywhere voices cracked into nothingness, names slipped like water through fingers. The streets became a graveyard of faces whose eyes still shone, but whose souls had been devoured. A man staggered into a tavern's ruins, calling for drink, though he no longer knew what drink was. He swallowed ash, cupping it in his hands until his throat clogged and his breath stilled. Above him the birds watched without pity, their wings blotting the stars by dawn. No one could recall who they were before a husband walked past his wife without recognition. A mother let her child slip from her grasp, not knowing why the little one reached for her. They drifted like ghosts, among the ruins, wandering without ties, without names, without self. The fire burned wood, but the birds burned history, and the girl smiled. Her whisper carried through every throat, hollowed by silence. It said nothing and everything. It said, "You are mine." The feast did not end with night. Even when morning came, the sky remained black with wings. The sun rose, but its light never reached the streets. The flock ate shadows until the village itself seemed hollowed. Walls stood, yet cast no shade. Streets stretched, yet led nowhere. The people moved, yet left no trace, as though the earth itself had forgotten they existed. One survivor, an old man, swore that he saw his own shadow peel from his feet and fly upward, joining the flock. He fell to the cobblestones, shrieking, but his scream made no sound. His lips moved, but no air obeyed. And when his chest stopped, he did not fall silent. He had been silent already. The crows were not feeding. They were erasing the memory of the living, the record of the dead, the shadow of the village itself. And as they fed, the girl swayed in their rhythm, her hair lifting in the current of wings, her hands tracing patterns in the soot that marked bargains too old to name. One boy with no past left to lose staggered toward her. His eyes vacant, his lips cracked with thirst. He knelt before her as though in prayer. "Who am I?" he whispered, though no voice carried. The girl opened her eyes pale as milk, her smile small and sharp. "You are nothing," she whispered back, and "nothing is mine." At her words the boy dissolved into ash. The flock stirred once and settled as if satisfied with their portion. By the second night the village itself was hollow. Every house stood, but within each room was only shadow. No voice, no memory, no prayer remained. And when the last bell rang its hollow chime, the flock rose in a single wave, their wings blotting the horizon until day and night were no longer distinct. The sky itself had become a mouth swallowing light, swallowing memory, swallowing all. When the birds scattered at last, the village remained standing, but it was not alive. Its streets were filled with bodies that still moved, yet were no longer men and women. They wandered in circles, their eyes pale, their mouths slack. They remembered no name, no kin, no past, and overhead the crows lingered, their hunger satisfied, yet never sated their eyes, fixed on the girl who had given them the feast. She walked barefoot among them, leaving no prints, her lips still whispering, her shadow stretching across stone and bone, every step a promise that the feast had only begun. At midnight the bells began to ring, though no hands pulled their ropes. The sound bled across the burned streets, carried on ash and smoke, rattling the marrow of every sleeper who had not yet fled. The tone was neither bright nor solemn. It was hollow, as if iron itself had grown tired of silence and chose to scream. The city had burned half to skeleton, yet the steeple stood blackened but unbroken. Its spire pierced the smoke like a finger accusing the heavens. The bells inside swayed as though moved by a storm, though the air was still. Each toll carried not only through streets but through bodies vibrating bone and organ, until every heartbeat staggered to its rhythm. Those who survived long enough to tell the tale swore they felt the bells inside their skulls. Not a sound but a pressure, a hammering against thought itself. Mothers pressed cloth to their children's ears, but it did nothing. The sound was not in the air, it was in the blood, and through it all the girl stood in the shadow of the steeple, her soot-stained dress clinging to her thin frame. Her lips did not move, but her eyes reflected every swing of the iron. When the bells struck, she smiled, a smile thin and sharp as glass, carried not by joy, but by possession. Priest crawled from the wreckage of his rectory, his robes black with soot, his mouth torn from shouting prayers that would not hold. He lifted trembling hands toward the tower. "Cease, cease, in the name of the Lord. Cease this blasphemy." But the bells only rang harder, the sound bending the air itself. The priest staggered forward, clutching his ears, his knees breaking upon the cobblestones. The girl looked at him and tilted her head, as if listening to the echo within him. And then the bells changed. No. Longer did they toll in iron, but in voice. Each swing carried words, though no tongue spoke them. The voice was the priest's. His own prayers now broken into laughter, echoing from the tower above. He screamed into the dirt, but the bells screamed, his voice higher and louder, until the city itself mocked him. The flock lifted from the rooftops to circle the steeple, their wings beating in time with the chime, until the air itself became a choir of iron and feather. Those who listened too long felt madness seeping through their ears. One woman tore at her hair until her scalp bled, swearing she could hear her dead husband calling her name from inside the bell. Another man tried to climb the steeple, believing his child's voice was trapped inside its iron throat. He reached the first ledge before the birds descended their wings, knocking him loose. He fell, but no body struck the ground, only feathers scattering like ashes. The girl's smile widened her pale hand, lifting toward the tower, as though she were the conductor of this dreadful symphony, and the bells obeyed. They rang without pause, they rang without end. Their rhythm broke the night into fragments. No hour, no minute, no silence. Only the unceasing toll that stripped the city of time itself. Some swore the earth trembled beneath them, as though the tower's roots burrowed deep into the bones of the buried others, swore the bells carried through the river itself, for fish floated dead to the surface, their bodies shaking, as if crushed by unseen sound. Everywhere the toll carried it, hollowed what it touched. By dawn there were no clocks left, no measure of time, only the endless toll echoing through skull and stone. One boy, too young to fear, wandered toward the steeple. Clutching a charred toy in his hand, he stood at the girl's side, looking up at the swaying iron. "Why do they ring?" he whispered. The girl finally spoke, her voice thin as smoke drifting from ruin. "Because they were promised to," the boy asked. "Promised? To who?" She leaned close, her whisper brushing his ear to me. The child dropped his toy, his eyes clouding with ash. He stumbled forward into the shadow of the steeple where the bells tolled louder and louder until his small body was lost in their sound. When the birds rose again, no one remembered his name. The bells did not stop. They rang through fire, through silence, through the cries of the last survivors, and each toll seemed to feed the flock. The crows swayed with every strike their eyes, rolling white, their wings twitching in rhythm, as though the sound had become their heartbeat. At last the steeple itself cracked its stone body, groaning under the unearthly rhythm. The bells swayed so wide, it seemed they would break loose and fall. Yet they never did. They swung and swung, their iron mouths gaping in endless cries, and above them, perched on the highest cross, a figure too small to be seen, yet undeniable. The girl's shape reflected against the moonlight, though she stood below, still smiling in the street. Two figures at once, one below, one above her body and her shadow and her command. The bells did not stop. The bells will never stop. The ground cracked open with white fragments, as though the earth itself had spit out skeletons. Ash clung to the air like breath that refused to die, and from beneath the cobblestones bones rose in crooked patterns, ribs jutting from soil like the hulls of drowned ship skulls grinning from beneath blackened timber. Every house held more bones than it ever held people. A cottage built for 4 cradled 40 femurs. A cellar meant for wine bristled with jawbones stacked like fruit. Some whispered the fire had unearthed the forgotten dead of centuries past. Others swore the crows had pulled marrow straight from the living until their bodies collapsed into bone. No one could tell which was true, for every doorway opened upon a new tomb. The girl walked barefoot among them, her steps light, her dress trailing soot. She left no prints, no mark in ash, no indentation in dust. It was as if the bones themselves parted to make way for her, as though they too recognized their master. Her eyes flicked over skulls that bore no names, and she smiled as if counting treasures. The few who still clung to life stumbled through this graveyard of their own homes. A woman entered her parlor, only to find chairs arranged around a table set not with plates but with rib cages. She screamed, but the sound carried no further than her own ears, for the flock had stripped her voice. Her scream echoed only inside her skull until she fell gnawing at her own hands to silence it. An old man lifted a door. Half buried in ash beneath it, he found a cradle carved with delicate care. Inside lay no child, but a spine curled as if still trying to grow. He wept, though he no longer knew for whom. The tears fell upon the bone and vanished as if drunk by it. By day the bones bleached white in the pale light. By night they glowed faint, as if remembering the warmth of flesh they once carried. The streets grew narrow with them. Houses bulged with them. Cellars overflowed until the village was no longer a place of the living but a reliquary. Every gust of wind carried the sound of rattling, as if invisible hands were shaking the remnants of those erased, and through it all the girl moved silently. She lingered at doorways, tracing symbols into the soot with fingers black as cinders. Each mark carried the shape of wings of talons of bargains. The bones shivered where she passed, as though the marrow within remembered something the flesh had forgotten. One survivor dared to follow her steps, believing perhaps she was a child lost who needed saving. He whispered prayers as he moved, though no sound escaped his lips. When he reached the square, he saw her standing among a mound of skulls higher than a man. She lifted her hands, and the skulls turned their faces upward as if listening. The sockets glowed faintly red, as though coals burned deep within. The man fell to his knees, tears streaming, as he realized the faces were not strangers. They were neighbors, his kin, his wife, his sons. Yet when he reached to touch one, the skull turned to dust in his palm. The girl laughed a soft, breathless laugh, and the rest followed, crumbling into grey clouds that swallowed him until nothing of him remained. The village sank deeper into silence. The bells had stopped, yet the bones rang louder than iron. Every creak, every whisper of shifting ribs was a hymn to something too old for prayer, too sharp for mercy. Even the crows seemed hushed, perched upon beams, their eyes unblinking, as though honoring what had been. Made for the village was no longer wood and stone. It was bone walls of ribs, streets of spines, doors of skulls. A new city built upon the remains of those who once named it home, and at its center stood the girl, her soot-stained dress brushing the remains, her lips still moving in whispers that coaxed more bones from beneath the earth. Some swore they saw hands rise from the soil, not flesh, only skeletal fingers clawing upward as if desperate to join her. Some swore they saw entire figures crawl from beneath the cobble's hollow bodies with empty sockets that followed her steps like loyal dogs. They left no prints as she did, no sound, no cry, only the creak of bone bending in obedience. The village had become her church, and bones its congregation. At dusk, the sky burned red, though no sun pierced the smoke. The girl stood upon the mound of remains, her face calm, her eyes unblinking. She lifted both arms, and the skeletal hands rose in answer, as if swearing fealty. And when the wind shifted, the bones rattled together, creating a sound that was not unlike words, a chant without tongue, without throat, a covenant spoken in marrow. The survivors who saw it fled, though they carried no names, no memories. They fled only with the knowledge that the village no longer belonged to them. It belonged to her by night. The streets lay still, no wind, no flame, only the faint shuffle of bone shifting in darkness. And if one listened closely, one could hear it, the sound of bone grinding into ash. The sound of skulls whispering to one another in voices too faint to catch, too heavy to ignore. It was the sound of history being rewritten, not in ink, not in fire, but in bone. And at the heart of it, the girl waited, her eyes pale, her lips whispering, her hands raised to call not just crows, not just flame, but the very marrow of the earth itself, for the village of bones was not the end, but the beginning. Beneath the ash, the ground pulsed as if something hidden breathed there. It was not the rhythm of soil or stone, but the steady beat of a heart, ancient and unyielding. Each tremor traveled upward through the bones scattered above until they clattered, together like teeth grinding in restless sleep. The girl moved through the ruins with her soot-blackened dress trailing behind her like a veil of mourning. Her bare feet stirred nothing, her weight lighter than dust itself. She came to the well at the center of the square, its stones blackened, its rope frayed, its mouth choked with ash. And there she knelt, whispering into its hollow throat. The survivors who lingered at the edge swore they heard the well whisper back. Not words, not sound, but the scraping of talons on stone, the rush of wings beating deep underground. Some claimed the smoke thickened at that moment, darkening into shapes almost human, yet bent crooked, as if broken in birth. Others swore the ash rose in spirals forming, symbols that branded themselves upon the eye long after one dared to look away. The girl's whisper grew into chant. Her lips moved without pause, her eyes unblinking, her hands spread wide as if offering both herself and the dead that lay scattered about. At her call the bones shuddered. Their joints creaked, their skulls cracked with faint echoes like laughter. Trapped inside, one by one they began to crawl, finger bones scratching cobbles, spines rising like snakes' jaws snapping open. Though no sound spilled forth. They dragged themselves toward the square, toward the well where the girl's voice deepened into a sound that was no longer hers but borrowed from something older, something waiting below. The covenant was not spoken, it was carved into marrow. Each bone that scraped forward left behind trails etched into ash-forming circles, lines, spirals that joined together until the square itself became a sigil. From above it would have appeared as a wing stretching across the ruins, a blackened scripture written in fragments of the dead. The survivors watched with hollow eyes, unable to flee. Their legs would not move. Their tongues would not scream, their hearts only beat faster against ribs that felt no longer their own. They felt. The call too felt marrow stir, as though it longed to leap from their bodies, to join the forming covenant. And when the pattern was complete, the well-exhaled ash burst outward like smoke from a furnace. The ground trembled, stones split, beams cracked, and from the depths came a sound like the breaking of wings. Something vast stirred below its breath, rattling through every bone in the square. The covenant had been answered. The girl stood unmoving, her face pale, her eyes wide as though seeing not with her own vision, but with that of the thing that rose beneath. She lowered her arms, palms turned outward, and the skeletal congregation bent in unison, their heads bowed as though in prayer. The chant rose not from mouths, but from bone itself, a resonance that echoed across the village like 1,000 hollow flutes. It was worship, but not of God, not of saint, not of spirit. It was worship of hunger, of fire, of wings spread too wide for the sky, the well cracked further, a hand of bone larger than any man's reached upward. Its fingers tipped with talons, it grasped the stone rim and pulled as if lifting the world itself. From the hollow came a figure, not flesh, not pure bone, but something bound in both. Its form shifted with every glance. Sometimes a great bird with wings of charred ribs, sometimes a man with a skull for a face, sometimes nothing but a storm of ash. The girl bowed before it, her lips brushing the dirt as though kissing its feet. Though feet it had none, those who watched fell to their knees not by choice but by weight. Their spines bent, their ribs groaned, their skulls lowered without consent. The covenant claimed them not in spirit, but in body. Their bones ached, their marrow screamed to be freed, to be placed upon the ash in patterns to strengthen the mark, and some collapsed entirely, skin sinking as if devoured from within, until only skeletons remained crawling to take their place among the sigil. The figure spread its shifting wings, ash bursting outward, to coat every corner of the village where it touched wood. Rotted stone cracked and flesh withered, yet the girl only smiled, her soot-blackened fingers reaching upward as if to grasp its hand, its talon, its shadow. It leaned closer, though no face, looked down, and for a moment silence fell over the ruins. In that silence a pact was sealed. No sound marked it, no word confirmed it, only the shiver of every bone and the sudden stillness of the earth itself. The covenant beneath the ash had been completed. The girl was no longer child, she was vessel. The figure sank once more into the well, though the stones no longer held its weight. The ground sealed itself as if nothing had ever emerged, but the mark remained burned into ash and bone alike. The bones lay still again, but they were no longer dead, no longer forgotten. They were waiting. The survivors crawled away into shadow. Their bodies hollowed, their eyes blackened. They would carry the covenant within them until the day the flock returned. For what had risen had not risen fully. It had only tested its wings, and the girl now walked with a new silence, a silence not her own, but shared with the thing below. Where her shadow fell, bones stirred, where her breath touched, walls cracked. Where her gaze lingered, crows gathered. She was the covenant clothed in flesh, and the village. It was no longer a place of memory, it was no longer ruin, it was an altar. The fire raged across the city, devouring timber, brick, and flesh alike. It licked at rooftops with tongues of crimson. It leapt across alleys. It swallowed the sky in smoke so thick no stars could pierce it. Yet through the roar of flame, another sound rose, sharper, darker, endless, the beating of wings. At first the people thought the fire itself had birthed them, embers reshaped into birds. But when the black rain descended, they saw feathers untouched by flame, saw eyes like wet obsidian reflecting. The inferno without fear. The crows did not burn. Their wings smoldered but never turned to ash. They circled above like shadows cut loose from the earth, refusing to die, refusing to scatter. Every strike of their wings sent sparks tumbling, yet the sparks did not fall as fire but as whispers. 1,000 voices hissed across the rooftops, like breath pressed against ear canals. The people clutched their heads screaming, but the screams drowned beneath the chorus of crows. It was not the cry of animals, it was not the caw of hungry birds. It was the language of graves, a tongue born of marrow and silence. Each shriek formed a word not meant for the living, each echo a command older than fire. They swooped into the streets, not for scraps of bread, not for flesh. They fixed their eyes on faces. They landed upon shoulders, their claws biting deep, not tearing skin, but drawing something unseen. A man staggered as his reflection peeled from him like smoke, leaving his eyes glassy, his mouth silent. A woman fell as her name slipped free, a shape of breath stolen into a crow's beak, leaving her family unable to speak it again. The flock feasted not upon bodies, but upon memory itself, stripping the soul bare until nothing remained but husk and bone. The fire spread, yet it could not drive them away. Flames rose around them, wings caught in torrents of heat, yet feathers never turned to ash. Each crow carried a piece of something stolen, a fragment of a life, a sliver of a scream. They wove it together in their cries, until the city itself echoed like a choir of the forgotten. The girl stood at the center of the ruin, her soot-blackened dress fluttering though no wind stirred. She lifted her hands, and the crows turned as one, their wings folding into silence as they hovered above her. She whispered, and her voice rode their cries until every ear in the city bled with her words, though no one could repeat them. It was a hymn to the fire, and the flame seemed to bow to her, refusing to consume her shadow, refusing to touch her skin. A priest staggered from the church, clutching his charred Bible to his chest. He lifted the cross above the flames, his voice trembling with prayer. But the crows descended upon him, their wings smothering, the silver their cries drowning his words until even he forgot the God he called. When the fire cleared, he was gone, yet the Bible remained, pages unburned but blank, as if no scripture had ever been written. And so the people learned the fire was not the terror. The fire was only stage, the curtain that hid the true devourer. It was the wings unburning, the wings that fed upon the marrow of identity. It was the girl whose smile glimmered through the smoke, her teeth blackened yet shining as, though lit from within by the covenant she had sealed. The crows rose higher, circling the city in a spiral so vast it blotted out the moon. Their shadows stretched long across burning walls, forming shapes of towers, gates, and altars not built by men but by the memory of something older. Each shriek carried the sound of a human tongue, and within the din you could hear fragments of the lost voices crying out names, pleading for light, begging for water. But their cries were woven into the flock, their identities devoured and reshaped into fuel for wings that would never fall. A child covered in soot crawled from the rubble, her eyes wide with terror. She reached for her mother's hand, but the woman did not know her. Her own name had been torn away, carried in a crow's beak to circle forever above the city. The girl who survived sobbed soundlessly, for even her own voice slipped from her throat and joined the chorus overhead. By dawn the fire had consumed all, yet still the crows remained. Their wings gleamed with ember, their feathers slick with smoke yet unburned. They perched upon chimneys, black against the rising sun, their heads turning in unison, their beaks still dripping with words stolen from the living. And in the center of the ruin, the girl stood untouched. Her soot-stained dress clung to her, her pale face lifted skyward, her lips curved in a smile that belonged not to a child, but to something enthroned. She lifted her hand, and 100 crows descended, landing upon her arms, her shoulders, her hair. They wrapped her in feathers until she was no longer a girl but a queen, crowned in black wings. When she spoke, her voice was no longer her own. It was the sound of 1,000 lost souls speaking in unison, a tide of voices breaking against the ruins. The wings that would not burn had given her dominion, and the city knelt even in death. When the last flames flickered into ash, the city lay shrouded in smoke that moved like a living veil. The streets cracked black and broke in the air, thick as tar, the sky hollow where stars once dared to shine. What remained was not ruin alone, but a wound carved into earth, a hollow where sound itself recoiled. For hours the fire had roared, the crows had shrieked, the people had wailed in terror. But when morning broke, no cries rose from the streets, no flutter of wings, no sob of survivors. Only silence, a silence so heavy it pressed upon lungs like stone, forcing breath to slow, forcing hearts to falter. It was not absence of noise, but presence of something deeper, an endless quiet that seemed to drink sound before it could be born. Those who stumbled through the ash could not speak. Their mouths opened, but their voices vanished, swallowed before leaving their lips. The silence did not permit words. Even footsteps fell mute, though ash shifted beneath them. It was as if the world itself had been muffled by unseen hands, pressing against its mouth. Among the ruins the girl walked untroubled, her soot-darkened dress trailing across the ground without sound. Even the crows perched above made no cry, their beaks opening and closing in. Silence, their wings beating in perfect hush. The silence had consumed them as well. Yet in their stillness, their black eyes burned brighter than flame, reflecting visions no man could bear to see. Some swore they could hear something beyond the silence. Hello hum, a lullaby carried not in air but inside their skulls. It was the girl's voice seeping through marrow, echoing through bone. She sang not with words but with vibrations soft as breath, cold as grave dirt. Her song wound into them until their thoughts were no longer their own. A woman clutched her ears, yet the sound persisted. A man beat his head against a wall until blood streaked the bricks, yet the lullaby flowed within him undisturbed. And when they could bear no more, they sank into the ash, their eyes closing, their lips parting into peaceful smiles. The silence swallowed them whole. The church stood shattered, its steeple cracked, its bells fallen and split. Yet at midnight the bells began to toll again, not with clapper, not with rope, but with the silence itself. Each toll a vibration rolling through the ruin, rattling bone, shaking marrow. No hand pulled the rope, no priest raised his arm. The bells rang because the silence wished it, and in the shadows of the church, the girl watched smiling. She swayed as though the toll was music, her lullaby weaving with it until the ruin itself became orchestra of the unholy. The soundless crows shifted upon the rafters, their heads tilting in rhythm wings, shivering in unison. Together, they composed a hymn no ear could hear yet. Every soul felt. Some tried to pray, but their prayers dissolved before forming. Some tried to scream, but only silence poured from their throats. It was as if the silence itself had become flesh pressing, fingers into their mouths, clawing words away before they could escape. What remained was only breath-heavy, shallow, consumed, before reaching the air. The city no longer echoed with life, no longer cried with death. It rested in a lull, hung between. Worlds, a silence after screams, but not peace, never peace. It was the hush before the blade falls, the quiet of wolves circling unseen, the pause between heartbeat and death. The girl's lullaby deepened. It grew darker, colder, a soundless vibration that stretched across the city, crawling into every crack of brick, every splinter of wood, every fragment of bone. She sang to no one, yet everyone heard, and as her lips curved into a smile, a shadow grew behind her, a shadow not shaped like a child, but like wings unfurled across the ruins. The silence thickened, pressing upon the earth like a shroud, and in that suffocating quiet, the people understood. This was not the end of the fire. This was not the end of the crows. It was only the silence, before their return. They say the ruins of the village still breathe. The air carries the stink of soot and feathers, though the fire died long ago, though the bodies crumbled into earth, though the names of the lost slipped from every tongue. What lingers is not memory, but presence, something that refuses to fade, something that crouches in the silence with wings folded and eyes fixed upon the living. If you walk those streets blackened and broken, you will hear no birdsong, no bark of stray dog, no rustle of grass. Through stone, only the weight of stillness pressing against your chest as if the very ground demands your heart, slow its beat to match its dead rhythm. And then the crows. They perch upon shattered chimneys, lining them like sentinels, their heads turning in perfect unison. Their feathers still bear the sheen of ash, their eyes bright as coals unconsumed by time. They do not move, they do not call, they only wait. Wait as though listening for a voice that has not yet returned. In the center of the ruin stands the girl. Her dress, once white, now stained black by soot, clings to her, as though the ash itself claimed her flesh as fabric. Her hair hangs loose, her face pale, her eyes dark hollows lit from within. She does not breathe, she does. Not blink yet, she moves. Each step soundless, each turn deliberate, as though rehearsed, a ritual repeated for centuries. Those who see her swear she raises her hand, slowly, fingers curling upward, as if calling something unseen. And when she does, the Crows stir their wings, shiver feathers rustle like paper tearing, but no sound escapes them, not even the faintest caw. They too are waiting. Some wanderers swear she speaks, though her lips barely move, a whisper that brushes the inside of their skulls. Colder than winter, sharper than broken glass. She calls not to them but through them, her voice searching for someone, for something promised in covenant, sealed beneath ash. And those who hear it return, changed, their eyes darkened, their voices hollow, as though part of them remained behind to keep vigil with her. The ruins themselves seem to bend around her. Walls lean as if bowing, streets crack as if reaching. The silence grows denser near her form, swallowing even the thought of words. Those who walk too close forget their names, forget why they came, forget the path back. They wander the ruins until the crows descend silent, circling above them, until only bone remains among the ash. And still she waits. Centuries pass, yet her figure remains, untouched. Time bends around her body, refusing to decay, refusing to surrender. The covenant bound her to the silence, to the wings, to the hunger beneath the earth. She cannot leave, she cannot die, she cannot rest, she can only wait, they say on nights. When the wind shifts, you can smell feathers singed yet unburned. You can hear wings beating, though no bird passes the sky, and if you follow the sound, it will lead you back to her, to the soot-stained dress, to the girl who calls. And once you see her, you will never walk away unchanged. Some say she waits for the return of the covenant, the rising of the figure beneath the ash. Some say she waits for the last name to be spoken, the final voice to be claimed by the silence. Others whisper she waits for the fire to spark again, to spread beyond the ruins, until every city, every village, every soul falls to the wings that cannot burn. But the truth is simpler and far more cruel. She waits because you will come, you the wanderer, the curious, the seeker drawn by stories spoken in whispers of crows and fire. You will come to the ruins and find her standing there. Her hand will rise, her fingers will curl, her whisper will pierce your marrow, and you will stay. The crows will turn their heads, in unison watching. The silence will thicken, pressing against your chest until your breath falters, and she will smile faint and hollow, her eyes blacker than the sky, because she knows the covenant grows stronger with each who joins her vigil. She knows the waiting will end only when the flock covers the earth. Until then the girl waits and the crows wait with her.